Imagine you're a Colombian citizen, forced to flee your home country to avoid cartel-related violence. You experience immense fear and uncertainty while crossing through South America till entering Mexico and then illegally into the US, maintaining hope of a brighter future for your family. Upon entering the US, you are told by others to keep going north and make your claim in Canada to avoid the potential pitfalls of the US refugee system. Upon reaching the Canadian border, you attempt to claim asylum, but are instead turned away by Canadian border officers and thrown into US refugee system. The US system then refuses to accept your claim and puts you on a list to be deported back to Colombia. This scenario, based on testimonies of real refugees, may seem far-fetched, but in reality, many face when trying to seek asylum in Canada due to the implementation of the Safe Third Country Agreement. The Safe Third Country Agreement is an agreement between Canada and the U.S. governments that was signed in an attempt to streamline and regulate the refugee application process at official land border crossings. The bilateral agreement requires asylum seekers to apply for protection in the first safe country they arrive in and allows border officers to return claimants who fail to do so. The agreement has faced much criticism and backlash from refugee advocacy groups, which contest that the U.S. cannot always be considered a safe country for refugees, that although it may reduce the number of refugee claims at the border, it also leads to an increase in illegal border crossings, putting many asylum seekers at risk. This video will break down the Safe Third Country Agreement, first providing background information on how and why it came to be, before then examining the results of the Safe Third Country Agreement in practice, its human cost, the legal challenges and criticisms against the Act, and why the Safe Third Country Agreement is important to all Canadian and American citizens, not just asylum seekers. The idea of a Safe Third Country Agreement has been around for a long time, with it first entering the Canadian legal system in 1987 as a response to boats full of South Asian refugees landing in Canada. By 1989, Bill C-55 was passed, which saw the formation of the Immigration and Refugee Board, the IRB. This bill also allowed the IRB to begin returning refugee claimants who had traveled to Canada through other countries to the previous countries that they were in. Talks of establishing a full-scale Safe Third Country Agreement between Canada and the U.S. maintained throughout the 1990s, with an agreement never coming to fruition due to fears of both sides of the border of having to re-intake asylum seekers on a large scale. Everything changed, however, on September 11, 2001, as the 9/11 terrorist attacks sparked a massive overhaul of the U.S. border protection measures. This reopened the door for negotiations, and the Safe Third Country Agreement was signed soon after in December 2002, came into effect 2 years later in December of 2004. The purpose of the Safe Third Country Agreement is to, quote, help both governments better manage access to the refugee system in each country for people crossing the Canada-U.S. land border. Although the Safe Third Country Agreement is written as a symmetrical piece of legislation, that is not the case. Because of their geographic locations, there are many more claimants that attempt to enter Canada through the U.S. than there are claimants that enter the U.S. through Canada. As a result, the Safe Third Country Agreement looks to be quite lopsided, with more of a benefit going to Canada. Canadian officials have addressed this, with John Manley, the Deputy Prime Minister at the time of the STCA's inception, saying that one of the main purposes of the Act was to prevent asylum shopping, a practice where refugees wait to claim asylum until they are in a country that will give them more favorable treatment or benefits. As previously mentioned, the Safe Third Country Agreement prohibits third country nationals who first entered the U.S. from claiming asylum in Canada at official land ports of entry, and vice versa. There are exemptions, however, as claims can still be made if the claimant meets exception criteria. These exceptions include being an unaccompanied minor, having a family member over the age of 18 in the receiving country who is already a refugee, has lawful status, or has an eligible claim pending, or lastly, if the person claiming asylum arrived with a validly issued visa. Even if claimants meet the criteria for exception, they must still meet other requirements for immigration to Canada before they can be accepted, and if they don't in any way, such as having a violation or criminal record, their claim can be denied. Most applicants who attempt to enter Canada through an official land point of entry do not fall into any of these exceptions, making them ineligible to make a claim and resulting in their return to the U.S. Upon their return to the U.S., some claimants are then unable to receive protection because of American immigration policy, such as their 1-year deadline to apply, resulting in them facing detention or even deportation. This brings into question the effectiveness of the Safe Third Country Agreement at ensuring the safety of all asylum seekers. Refugees fear that if they apply in the U.S. that they will not receive adequate protection, so then they look to Canada for help. Canada then turns a cold shoulder on these refugees, directing them right back to the U.S., leaving them at risk. When looking at the effectiveness of the Safe Third Country Agreement, the change in the number of claims following the agreement's inception is quite stark. From 1989 to 2004, there was an average of 29,686 claims made annually for asylum upon entering Canada, of which approximately 8,436 would be made at a border point of entry. In 2005, immediately following the implementation of the Safe Third Country Agreement, there was only 22,434 claims made, and only 3,940 of them were at official border points of entry. The number of asylum claims made at the border dropped to only 47% of the previous average, showing that the Safe Third Country Agreement was capable of slowing the flow of refugees into Canada. Certain groups are affected more than others by the Safe Third Country Agreement, such as Colombians. Colombians made up 14% of claimants in 2004, and 97% of Colombians made their claims at official land borders, since it's difficult to reach Canada from Colombia without traveling through the U.S. The number of claims by Colombians has fallen significantly since the implementation of the Safe Third Country Agreement, with claims at the border points of entry in 2005 dropping to 24% of the previous year's totals. Inland claims by Colombians also increased over this span, suggesting that Colombian claimants began finding alternative ways to enter Canada before claiming asylum in an attempt to work around the Safe Third Country Agreement. These inland claims are not subject to Safe Third Country Agreement rules, meaning that any claimants who are able to cross the border into Canada are then able to apply for asylum without risk of being sent back to the U.S. Even if they are intercepted by the RCMP during crossing, these seekers are still eligible to claim asylum since it's outside of a border point of entry. The following image is a diagram of this process. If an asylum seeker leaves from this U.S. port and requests asylum, they will be turned back, the red arrow. But if the same refugee leaves the U.S. point of entry and enters Canada through alternative means, they can then surrender to the RCMP and still be eligible to seek asylum. These refugees who enter Canada through alternative means are often referred to as illegal immigrants, but in reality, these refugees should be referred to as irregular immigrants. Due to their intent of crossing the border to seek asylum, Canadian and international refugee laws see their crossing into Canada as legal. Since before it was even passed, the Safe Third Country Agreement has faced opposition from various human rights organizations and refugee advocacy groups. One of the main arguments against the act is that it breaks international refugee laws, specifically regarding Article 33 of the Refugee Convention. Article 33 states that no one shall face refoulement, being returned to a country in which they would face torture, cruel punishment, or other irreparable harm. It is argued that since the criteria for obtaining asylum in the U.S. varies from those in Canada, returning asylum seekers to the U.S. may result in them being sent back to their country of origin, where they could face harm. This is not the only article of the Human Rights Convention that comes to question when looking at the Safe Third Country Agreement, as others, such as Article 3, Non-Discrimination, Article 31, Freedom from Constraints on Freedom of Movement, and Article 34, Consideration for Naturalization, all could be barred in one way or another by the Safe Third Country Agreement. Judicial challenges have been made against the Safe Third Country Agreement in Canada, such as a failed challenge to the Canadian Supreme Court in 2009, trying to reverse the designation of the U.S. as a safe third country due to its poor treatment of asylum seekers. In 2011, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights found that Canada had denied 3 claimants the right to seek asylum by sending them back to the U.S. and denying them due process. This led the IACHR to the conclusion that, quote, if there's any doubt to the refugee claimant's ability to seek asylum in the third country, then the member state may not remove the refugee claimant to that third country, meaning that Canada could not redirect asylum seekers to the U.S. if there was a chance that the U.S. would not provide them asylum. The fight against the Safe Third Country Agreement isn't just on the international stage, as some non-profit organizations, such as the Citizens for Public Justice, advocate for the disruption of this Safe Third Country Agreement. The group cites many of the reasons listed above, with an emphasis on the difference in treatment of asylum seekers by the U.S. and Canada. Citizens for Public Justice cited that policy put in place under the first Trump administration erases any notion that the U.S. is a safe country for refugees, and in 2018, the UN stated that the treatment of asylum-seeking families by U.S. border officials opposed human rights standards and principles. They believe that the failure of the U.S. to meet international refugee standards brings into question its status as a safe country, and that Canada must leave the Safe Third Country Agreement behind to ensure the safety of all claimants. So, why is the STCA important to you as a regular Canadian citizen? The main reason that the Safe Third Country Agreement should be important to Canadian citizens is its link to our country's willingness to ensure international human rights standards. The agreement impacts the lives of thousands of potential asylum seekers annually by shaping the manner in which they can receive protection. By redirecting claimants to the U.S., Canada may be putting them at risk of poor treatment by U.S. officials or for being sent back to their home countries to face whatever persecution they had been running from, both of which violate the Human Rights Convention. This is best shown using an example. One Nigerian claimant told the Citizens for Public Justice that there was a life threatening condition for them and their daughter. Not one person told them to even try to stay in the U.S. They all said, go to Canada. This testimony shows how important our treatment and acceptance of refugees is. Staying in the U.S. meant uncertainty and fear, while the idea of entering Canada brought hope for a better future. Another reason why the Safe Third Country Agreement is more important now than ever is the shift of power in the U.S. Tensions surrounding the Safe Third Country Agreement rose greatly during the first Trump administration, and with a large part of the 2024 campaign being based upon removing illegals through mass deportation and firming up the border, the Safe Third Country Agreement may soon be front page news in both countries. Take this video as a call to action to stand up for what is right. Citizens for Public Justice has provided a letter template linked in the description of this video addressed to Bill Blair, the Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction in Canada. The letter goes over why the Safe Third Country Agreement needs to be removed or amended and states concern regarding the well-being of asylum seekers who attempt to enter Canada. By sending said letter, you can make your voice heard regarding the Safe Third Country Agreement, but that's not the only option. Sharing the information you've learned and making others aware of what is going on at our border is a valuable way to help ensure the safety of refugees who seek asylum in Canada. Overall, the Safe Third Country Agreement is a very complex agreement that can be viewed from a variety of angles. On one hand, it's been successful in lowering the amount of refugee claims at the Canadian border, but it has also increased the number of irregular crossings. No matter which angle you look at the agreement from, one thing is certain. It is far from perfect and needs to be changed if Canada is committed to maintaining the human rights standards set in place by international organizations, such as the UN. The U.S. may seem like a safe country to lawmakers, but the lived experience of a refugee claimant may tell a different story. We need to urge our government to take another look at the Safe Third Country Agreement and amend the document to provide adequate protection to all.